Okay, let's have a look at the game that was played today. Ding was white. Ding's down 3-2 before this game. Let's see what happened. Yay, Jeebus. Thank you, Jeebus. Thanks for the 5 subs. Actually, I just learned there's a great Japanese restaurant on 14 Mile Road in Clawson that's like a mile from my daughter. So, and they have things listed as vegan on the menu. You have to make a reservation. It's sort of fancy schmancy. But I'm going to go there next time I come to Michigan because it's near my daughter. And, you know, if they specifically list vegan stuff on the food. And their chef was up for a James Beard Award or something. So it doesn't make any sense. It's in Clawson. Clawson's not known for anything. It's known for not being known for anything. That's what it's known for. Yeah, she used to live in Royal Oak and she moved about a mile away, so now she's in Clawson. There's a bagel place in Clawson. Yeah, that makes sense. Sterling Heights, R.I.P. Man, the truth hurts. I mean, I grew up on the west side of Detroit, so the east side's all weird. Not that the west side isn't weird. Okay, so they ended up playing not a Catalan. I called the London the Catalan. I was close. So Ding played the London, and it seems like every game of this match, after move 5, we have a position we haven't seen before in the match. So this is after move 2. Ding played c4 a couple times. He didn't play knight f3. Okay, so he decided to play something else. And this is one of the main lines. And after knight bd2, since I don't really play white or black in this opening very often or ever. In fact, in tournament play, in slow chess, I would say I've never had this position with either side. I don't really know what the main line of theory is, but obviously Jan knows. So he traded. I guess the idea of knight bd2 is it makes queen b6 less strong because we have knight b3 defending both pawns. And I guess you can sacrifice this pawn also, but probably not in this position. Okay, so he played bishop f5. And it's good to play bishop f5 because you develop your bishop. It's bad to play bishop f5 because bishop b5, knight e5 is annoying. So you have to, as Joel Benjamin would say, you have to have it all worked out. You can't just fly by the seat of your pants and go, okay, I hope this isn't good for white. You have to know what's going on. Now, obviously, if you see the clock times, the players know what's going on. Okay, so played c3. Now the queen can get out and the pawn's not under pressure anymore. And this pawn's defended. So c3 makes sense. e6. Bishop b5. And I mean, e2 is a very passive square. You can't go to d3 because of here. So you play bishop b5. You want to play knight e5. And you have a 4-3 majority on the queen side. So you want to, get your queen side going eventually. Okay, and black played bishop d6. And I assume this is all theory, although the players right now are using time. So I would say the specific prep for this specific game that's not what's happening. And probably this position or similar positions were looked at by the players in their general preparation over the last 10 years. But that they didn't expect this position would occur because both sides have a lot of options. Okay, so he took the bishop, queen takes, castles. And this looks like a standard kind of London position where you could argue white's a little bit better, or you could argue black has completely equalized, white's not better at all. I think the position's completely equal, but I think it's easier to play white. Because black's main idea is to trade pieces and agree to a draw. And white's idea is either to advance on the queen side or put pressure here with the pawn on d4. We can try to put the knights on c5 and e5. Our rook has an open line, and I just think it's easier to play white. Now, on the other hand, I'm not 2790, so, Jan might disagree and say, I'd rather have black. I like playing black here. Black has easy play. I wouldn't mind having either position here in a slow game. This seems fine. Okay, so he played rook e1 because the rook is better on e1 than it is on f1. Occasionally we'll play knight f1 and put our knight somewhere. Occasionally we'll defend e4 more and make that harder to play. Okay, he played h6, and the reason is you want to get luft, and the main reason is you want to square for your bishop in case knight h4 happens. You don't want to worry about giving up your white square bishop, which is actually quite nice. Okay, he played knight e5. You can't take because I take back, and then you'd have to mess your king up. You could play queen here and not lose a piece, but I mean, my pawn's taking everything. Okay, so white's played knight e5. That's what he wanted to do. Black played knight e7. Now, this idea that Black came up with, I did an analysis of the game on my own, which probably isn't very good, although I had the engine helping me. And then I saw Geary complain about this in a 2-minute video on YouTube. There's a video on YouTube, because when the game was played with the live commentary, I was asleep. But when I woke up, I looked for like some information on the game, and Geary was really upset about what Black does now. He said Jan doesn't understand the position. So Jan probably felt if he played a6, White would play bishop takes c6, and then maybe put his other knight on c5, and White has sort of a grip and a bind and such. So he decided he'll play bishop knight e7, and then he'll play a6, and then the bishop has to retreat somewhere. And then maybe he'll play knight e4, or he'll play knight g6, or could play knight c8 to d6, and try to get his knight to a good square. Okay, and White played a4, and this is the point of the game that Geary didn't like what Black did, although the engine doesn't necessarily agree with him, but the engine's mainly looking at forced variations, and Geary's mainly talking about strategical ideas. He doesn't like the move a6, which in itself isn't that bad. The problem with a6 is if White gets to cheat and play lots of moves, White's going to play a5 and put his knight on c5, his pawn on b4, and White's got a great position. So this is the position where Geary really disliked Black's move, and he's right. In this position, Black has to play a move that very few people other than super grandmasters would consider. Okay, and that move is a5. Okay, we'll do an analysis board. Okay, now the reason we're playing a5 isn't because we want to play a5. It's because White wants to play a5. And then White can cement his knight here or play b4. Now, obviously, b4 sucks. And if we try to get our knight to c5, Black can play b6. So that's the end of knight c5. Okay, then the game continues, and the engine actually wants to take advantage of this square by putting a knight there, which makes sense. I couldn't put my knight there before. Now I can just sit there the rest of the game in Black's grill. So the engine wants to play knight b1, knight a3, knight b5, and still says White has a nice, little bit of an advantage because the knights are pretty good. There's no easy way to break through for White, but it's much more pleasant to have White. So in this position, Geary and the engines aren't big fans of what Jan does in this position. And that's why I said I think it's easier to play White. I think it's hard to play Black. Black's position looks pretty good. I'm not really sure how to improve it. Looks like everything's fine. Okay, so in this position, Jan made the first actual mistake, which gives White a very nice advantage, knight d7. And this just allows White to play a5. So he traded knights and played a5. Now, this pawn structure is really good for white. I don't mean here, although I do. I mean like anytime. Like if you can get this pawn structure and there's no c-pawn for black, this is really good because the white knight has, b6 and c5, and black's knight, if it wants to do something similar, has a bishop stopping it. Thanks, Psych91. So white wants to play knight b3, knight c5, b4, and I don't really know what black wants to play. That's the problem. So if I was black, I would seriously consider playing knight c8, knight d6. Black didn't do that, and the engine doesn't do that. That's why I'm no good. But that's the kind of thing I would like to do, is I want my knight to be good also. Have access to c4 and e4 and so forth. Okay. So he played queen c7. I guess if the knight comes to c5, it won't gain a tempo. And also, black may consider, although it's really risky, playing b6 to stop knight c5 and giving himself this isolated pawn, which is pretty weak. Okay, so white played queen f3. His queen's not really going over here. So queen f3 is okay. And the main reason is actually funny. It's not something I would have thought about during the game, but I like it. I'm not as good as the players. Is white wants to play queen g3 and trade queens. And then, we have just total domination of the dark squares with our knight and our pawns. And we're getting a queenside majority. Black doesn't have any counterplay. Obviously, in most positions in chess, when somebody's, pushing on the queen side, then we want to get some kingside counterplay, which looks like impossible for black and is extra impossible if I trade queens. The ending is just really good for white. All of black's pawns are on white squares. He has a white squared bishop. Conversely, my pawns are on dark squares and I have a white squared bishop. And I learned when I was 14 in Moscow at the chess seminar, you want pawns on the opposite color of your bishop so your bishop's more mobile. And obviously, since I have a pawn majority on the queen side, I would like to play on the queen side. Black has a pawn majority on the king side, but nothing he can do. Okay, so he played rook fc8. The engine was thinking about playing bishop c2 to stop knight b3. That's a pretty temporary measure. So he played rook c8, played rook a3. He's defending his pawn, so he can play b4. And he hasn't decided yet whether he's going to play knight b3 to c5 or rook b3 and put pressure this way on black's queen side. Or both. Like rook here, knight here, and so forth. And also, white's not in a hurry to play knight b3 to c5 because is black going to do something? Now, what's funny about this is this reminds me of the game yesterday where Jan was white and Jan had some positional pressure and black couldn't do very much. That reminds me of this position. White has some positional pressure and black can't do very much. Okay, he played bishop g6, which is very reasonable because he might want to play knight f5, knight d6. I wanted to play this, but I'm not playing. So I like the knight coming to d6. That's my kind of knight. Knight b3, obviously going to c5. He played knight c6, which I don't like. Now, the reason he played knight c6 is he was thinking, if you play knight c5, I'm going to play knight takes a5. Because as you all know, Jan likes his knights on a5. The other reason is to play e5 later. So that's why he played this move. But I don't really like that square for the knight. I think the knight on d6 is better. Okay, so he played queen g3, and he wants to trade queens, as I said earlier. And more importantly now, as a tactical justification, he wants to play knight c5, but his a-pawn's going to be hanging. So if he trades queens, then he can play knight c5, because his a-pawn wouldn't be hanging then, because the queen's not on it. Okay, he played queen e7, which also puts the queen off of the a-pawn. And he played h4, which is probably not a move I would think of. That's a pretty high-class move. He gives himself luft. And just like Jan did yesterday, he wants to play h5 later and sort of shut the black king in. Okay, rook e8. He's decided this is my counterplay, is to play e5. And he played e5, which is a mistake. In this position, the engine just wants to play b4 and say that black's position just sucks. Then I guess black would play e4, and the engine's not impressed with that. It's much more impressed with black's queenside play. But as a human, you know, you don't necessarily want to allow e4, and maybe in 10 moves, black can start pushing his kingside pawns. It's hard to do it immediately. And the engine literally doesn't care. It's like, you play there, I don't care. That's stupid. That just makes my queen better. I'm pushing on the queen side. Yeah, that's nothing. Okay, as a human, you typically don't want to allow this pawn to go here, and then you're worried later f5, f4 would come, although that's pretty hard to do. Okay, so Ding forced matters, which the engine immediately doesn't like. Then it changes its mind and says, yeah, that's good too. Okay, he played rook b3, which is very forcing. He wants to take on b7. And he's basically trading his a pawn for his e pawn, that's what white wants to do. White wants to, just demolish the center if possible. This was a really solid center. Now it's falling apart. When you put your pawn on a square that's attacked 3 times, once upon a time, Jan was falling in love with this position. Now it's only falling apart. Nothing he can do. So he did play knight takes a5, which attacks the rook and defends the b pawn. Rook takes e5. You can't get two rooks for a queen because this rook is defended. I'm still on the analysis board. Man, I'm dumb. Okay, so if you like try to get 2 rooks for a queen, which I just did, then knight takes, and you didn't do it. Okay. Sorry, I never left the analysis board, which happened to me yesterday too. Okay, just call me Yasser. So rook takes e5, so the queen has to move, and he did move the queen. Then rook a3. So white traded his a pawn for black's e pawn. Now the d pawn is weak. My knight is good. This knight is attacked, etc. Mainly etc. Now in this position, he played the move knight c4, forking the rooks. Okay, takes. The engine likes taking because it doesn't lose a rook. Okay, and now Ding made his only mistake of the game. And I did a review of the game afterwards, and Ding played like 94. Pretty good in a world championship game. What he should do is just take this pawn, which is similar to the game, but he gave Jan a chance here, which Jan didn't take. He played the move h5 because that's why he played h4. And here, black made a mistake. And I understand why he made the mistake. So black has a really tricky tactic here that nobody would see. Nobody would see it. Nobody. Only an engine would see it. So that explains why he played h5 and why Jan didn't punish h5, because it's not fair. He can take the rook. This looks incredibly stupid for black. Black's queen is hanging and black's bishop is hanging. So that looks dumb. And if you attack my knight, then I take your bishop. You take my knight and I take on f7. God damn. That's not good for black. Black's king is too exposed. I have a passed e pawn, etc. And what both players missed, and I mean, they would never see it. It's impossible to see, is queen to d8. And the idea is if you take, I check, and then I check. Obviously, this is a perpetual. Okay, so you have to play queen here if you want to win. And now I take this with check, and now I take your knight. And now black's up a pawn, so white's fighting for a draw. Okay, nobody's seeing that. So, all right. So after h5, Ding didn't see that black had that resource, and neither did Jan. And a lot of times, even if the resource is easier to find than it was here, you don't see it anyway because you sort of trust your opponent. Like, if I could play rook takes, pawn takes, he wouldn't have allowed that. He would have not played knight takes b7 right away. Okay, thanks Alt F4 Pro for subscribing. Yeah, when you have an engine, it's easy to see stuff. Okay. So he played bishop c2, and the reason it's a question mark is just because he didn't do that. Okay. Then knight takes b7. Good. White's a pawn up. Black has two isolated pawns. White has a passed pawn. It sounds good. That's because it is. Queen b6, threatening the knight and threatening the b2 pawn. Knight d6 is a really nice tactic. If you take the knight, then I check and take your queen. Okay, so you have to play rook takes rook because your rook's hanging, and then you have to play queen takes b2. Otherwise, you're a pawn down for nothing and lost. Okay, now you're threatening the rook. So he played rook a5. Now, this is really nice from Ding, because when Ding played knight takes b7, he had to see, after queen takes c3, why that move is bad. Okay, and that move is bad because of knight e8, threatening mate. There's two ways to stop mate. There's rook takes knight, and there's f6. What's funny is f6 is so bad, I'm not kidding. The engine says this move is better, giving the queen away. That's better than f6. Man, the engine doesn't like f6 either. f6, I play queen e7. I thought queen e7 was the right move, which it does win, but knight takes f6 wins more, and queen d5 check wins more. Obviously, queen d5 check wins. This isn't good. This is only +4? What? Rawr. +4 is bad because it was like +12. Okay, so you have to take. I take. You play here because it's the only legal move. Now I play rook d5, defending my pawn, which is not relevant. Rook d8 and queen mate. I told you that pawn was good on h5. Good pawn. Okay, so you can't play queen takes c3, so he didn't. He played king h7, putting it in h. Rook c5. Engine doesn't like that move. Now, here Ding is in time trouble. The engine wants to play a move that you really don't see in time trouble. If Ding had an hour on his clock, I think Ding would play the right move. But in time trouble, this is only the second best move. That's pretty good for time trouble. He should play queen e1, which defends his pawn, always retreat, and now we can safely take on c4 if we need to. And black doesn't have any, there's no counterplay with the queen. The queen sort of kills the black queen. What's funny is after bishop to d3, defending the pawn, I take the pawn. Amazing. And if you take, I check and take your rook on a8. So queen e1 was a masterful move that's very tough to see in time trouble. Played rook c5. Now black should play queen takes c3. And he played queen c1 check, which is a mistake. Now I was told, I don't know if it's true, some of you are probably watching the game live, you early risers or you Europeans. I was told that in Ding's time trouble, Jan was playing fast also to put the pressure on him. But probably if Jan had taken his time, he would have played queen takes c3, and it's a two-result game. I mean, white could win, but black could draw also. But Jan sees a check, Jan plays a check. It's a very bad move. It was attacking the pawn, now he's not. The king's safer on h2. So it's a very poor move, queen c1 check. And after the game, Jan said this was the worst game he ever played. But okay, everybody always says nonsense like that when they lose. Okay, f6, also a bad move. Never play f6. Queen g3, excellent move. Putting pressure here, defending the pawn on c3, and defending the knight, and stopping all the checks on the king. So perfect move. Okay, now Jan decided this was his counterplay. That's good counterplay. I can't argue with him. In fact, that's the only counterplay. So he played a5 and a4 and so on. Knight e3 was a very strong move. And in this position, I would have played a3 personally. because I think what Jan did was too slow. But let's look at A3. A3 is not a good move. I'm just telling you what I would have played. I'm me. What can I tell you? Okay, so rook here defending mate, knight here threatening knight takes. And by the way, this is what happened in the game, except black didn't play A3. Black's pawn was on A4. So this actually happened, except pawn was here. Okay, now let me show you guys a nice trick, but no crying. You might feel like crying. A2. Now I have two different checkmates. Well, I have three different checkmates. I don't know which one you like. I'll show you the one I like. I like queen G7, knight F6, rook C8, and mate. And you could also do it the other way around. You can play knight F6 check, queen G7 check, and then rook G8. Same mate. And the engine says rook G7 check is also the same mate. That doesn't sack the queens. That doesn't seem as good. Okay. So I would have played A3 and I would have lost like Jan did, but my pawn would have been closer to queening. See that? Good. Okay. And he played bishop B1. So the same thing happened. Rook C7, you have to play rook G8. Knight F6, threatening the same mate that we just talked about. So king H8, stopping all those mates. Played rook A7, A3, and now we're not really threatening the queen because the rook's behind our pawn. And unfortunately for Jan, this is move 40, and he played the best move. So now white's winning, and now Ding has lots of time. That was his 40th move. He made the time control. He had 4 minutes left, and now he can think forever on every move and win. Okay, he played rook F8, D5. D5 does two things. It does something that stops black from playing king E6 later, which is confusing, but I'll show you. And if nothing happens, I could, promote my pawn to a queen. He played A2, queen C7, double exclam, threatening knight G6 check, and queen G7 mate. That's not easy to stop. It's not. Knight G6 check, queen G7 mate. Tough to stop. The engine already announces mate. The engine says this is mate. Okay, he played king H7, knight G6, threatening queen takes G7 mate. So you have to play rook G8. And now queen F7. And the threat is, I told you I was going to explain D5 to you later. The threat is to take the rook and do a checkmate. So if black queens, which doesn't make any sense because I could just take it. Actually, that stops my mate. I can't play my mate anymore because your queen stops it. Okay, so I'll play another. I'll take your queen. Let's play another move. I don't know, bishop here. Okay, then I take, I check, and then mate because the pawn's on D5. And if you take the knight on G6, in this position, in the final position, I take with the pawn, and then I also queen sacrifice and mate you. So if you take the knight, I mate you. If you don't take the knight, I mate you. So actually the best move is to queen. And then I take the queen, and now it's still forced mate. The engine plays queen F4 check, giving the queen away. And the reason it's still forced mate is white's threatening the same mate. Queen takes rook, rook check, rook F8 mate. And bishop takes, not only loses the queen, rook takes queen, but even better is the same mate. So there's all these mates, and the only way to stop them is to give all your pieces away. So after queen F7, Jan resigned, and the match is tied again at 3. And the only thing that Ding did wrong that game, I would say, was rook C4 instead of queen E1. Queen E1's a hard move to see, and I wouldn't even say H5 is a mistake because the refutation of it is insane. Taking the rook and queen D8 because you have some, that's ridiculous. So I don't even call that a mistake because it's what Wes Berger calls a good mistake. It's a move the engine doesn't like, but it works out really good. because the opponent doesn't know why, and then you're crushing it. And that's some things computers see and some things humans do. And the gawking rabble, which is you guys are like, my engine says this, therefore all moves are double question mark. This is the worst game ever played because my engine didn't like these moves. Now, if that was the case, then if Magnus Carlsen played a match with, Cess or Cessi or some other supercomputer, and Magnus got, let's say, half out of 10 or 1 out of 10, something you'd expect, then you'd be like, that's the worst he's ever played chess because the engine said so. Engines are better than people, sorry. So humans make mistakes in every game. And this game, Ding made 1 or 2 mistakes depending on your definition of a mistake. And he played in the mid-90s, according to the chess.com thing that doesn't matter. And psychologically, after losing and being down at the beginning of the match, to play with such force and furious anger, I mean, that's pretty impressive from Ding. Like when Ding's black, it seems like he's groveling for a draw. And when he's white, he's sacking and mating and calculating. And to be perfectly frank, this game, and I've said it before, this game seems like a game with colors reversed. If you showed me this game, and you said this is the Ding-Yang match, I would guess that Yan is white. This seems like he played like Yan, and that black played like Ding. But it's very universal, the chess, because white played very enterprising, complicated, sacrifice, played for mate, and black was very solid and eventually got a pass pawn in the 7th rank. It's easy to say Yan played badly because the engine and the 10 best super grandmasters in the world said so. But when your opponent plays A5, A4, A3, A2, it's very scary. And if you remember, you don't, but if you remember the famous game where Anand was white against Carlsen in one of their matches, there's a Nimzo Indian game, I think it was the Nimzo Indian, but could be wrong, where Anand is like mating his opponent, Carlsen, and Carlsen playing A5, A4, A3, B5, B4, B3. And it's the most exciting thing ever. Anand made a mistake. He didn't make Carlsen, and Carlsen got 7 queens, so Carlsen won. It's very scary when your opponent's queening an A-pawn, because then if he queens it, you lose. And if your mate doesn't work, then you lose. And here, the mate works because of queen sacrifices. So, I mean, that's amazing. So, this is my favorite World Championship match in quite a long time. There's a lot of interesting games. The openings are different. They're not repeating the same first 18 moves. And you already saw it in game 2. I don't like that so much. I like this. This is the kind of match I want to see. Decisive games, back and forth. People complaining this is the worst match in the history of chess. I mean, the games are pretty good. And they're really exciting, and they're really nice to look at. It's nice to analyze them. So, yay Yan and yay Ding. And the match is tied, and we got 8 games to go. Nobody's the favorite. Rawr. So I hope you enjoyed that game. I'll be on later tonight doing my Sub Sunday. And I'm going to go watch the Braves game. The Braves are 11-4. Go Braves. And so forth. Thanks for supporting the channel. What little you did was good enough.